so that's all right. Hi, Bill. I'm there now, so that's all right.
Tonight we are joined by Dr. Jennifer Seavey. Dr. Seavey is the daughter of Taylor community resident and volunteer videographer for Seavey. She is a Kingsbury Executive Director of Shoals Marine Labs on Appledore Island in Maine, a joint facility of the University of New Hampshire and Cornell University. She also holds faculty appointments in the Natural Resource Conservation Departments of both institutions. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jennifer Seavey.
Thank you very much for that, and I'm really honored to be invited to speak to all of you fine people. I want you to raise your hand if my dad has paid you to be here. All right, I thought that was the case. All right, so I was playing some sounds of the island to invoke a little bit of summer because it's cold out. If it still doesn't, yeah. Just a couple moments of that. So I'm here to tell you about Shoals Marine Laboratory, and it is this joint institution of the University of New Hampshire and Cornell. Are there any UNH alumni? Or I thought there might be just a couple. Yeah, I thought there'd be a couple. What about Cornellians? Any Cornellians in this crowd? All right, go Big Red. All right, excellent. How many of you have actually been to any of the islands in the Isles of Shoals? All right, here's the choir. Which ones of you have been to Appledore Island? All right, that's excellent. I'm kind of surprised by that. Okay, so Shoals Marine Laboratory, one thing they should know right off the start, it is the largest marine laboratory in the country that focuses on undergraduate education. So you might know Woods Hole or Scripps or Duke Marine Lab, right? Those are other big famous labs. Those are research institutes. And while we have a lot of research, and I'll tell you about a little bit of that, what we really focus on is the science pipeline. The science workforce of the future and inspiring students to take up science, especially marine science. So that's why I named this where we are inspiring people to take up sciences. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why the marine environment, why our particular location is really important, and then what we do at Shoals.
Excuse me.
Yes?
Would anybody else think it'd be nice if we turned off that light? This central light?
I think we're going to get some help. Thank you. It's kind of glary off there, too. Yeah. All right. Oh. All right. Thank you. All right, so let's start, everybody, right now. Just be here in this place. Let's take a breath together. And another one. That second breath was brought to you by the ocean. So every time you breathe twice, thank the ocean. It is multitudes of phytoplankton, little tiny microscopic plants that are breathing in the ocean right now and putting 50% of the oxygen into the air right now. I mean, life on Earth is made possible by the ocean. The ocean is the reason why we have the climate that we do. The ocean is the reason why we have the water that we do. It's the source of the water cycle. And then think of all the things that you might enjoy, perhaps for dinner tonight, that also comes from the ocean. Think of all the things that might be in your pocket, your cell phone, your devices. That all has minerals, primarily comes from the ocean floor. So there's many reasons to be grateful for and protect and conserve and be interested in understanding the ocean. Unfortunately, the ocean is in trouble. You might imagine overfishing, that's a long-term impact we've had, but climate change is unfortunately impacting the oceans more than other systems on Earth. And that's primarily, it's a lot of reasons, but primarily for two reasons. One is I said the oceans regulate the climate, and that's because it has a great ability to absorb heat and retain heat. And so as the global temperature is changing, the oceans are absorbing that heat. Another amazing thing the ocean does is absorb carbon dioxide. And the oceans have actually been insulating us from the effects of climate change until recently. The ocean is now taking a turn, and this is ocean acidification. You've probably heard about in the news. So the oceans are in trouble. Climate change is a big, major threat that they're facing, but also overfishing, the harvesting of minerals, pollution, a lot of laundry list of things. Unfortunately, the Gulf of Maine, if you're interested, as I am, in climate change and marine systems, the Gulf of Maine is ground zero. It is warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans. This graph right here, this little bell curve, this is temperature anomalies across the world's ocean from the 1980s until recently. And the Gulf of Maine is right here, way off the chart. Warming faster. This is Gulf of Maine temperature change from 1980 to 2015. And this dotted black line is the rate of increase across that entire time period. The red line is the most recent 15 years or so. And this line, this rate of increase, is increasing more and more as time goes by. That is a real kicker for the Gulf of Maine. The rate of temperature increase is ramping up. And this is the same data for the entire world. So it's this data on a map. And it just shows the red is warming, is a temperature anomaly of warming water. So the redder, the warmer. And you can see one of the big concentrations in the Western Atlantic, and especially the Gulf of Maine. The Gulf of Maine is expected over the next 80 years. This is a study that just came out this fall by a group of researchers led by University of Maine. And they say that the Gulf of Maine is expected to increase about 7 degrees Fahrenheit over the next 80 years. That's and that might sound at first to be great for swimming, but it's not great for everything else we love about the ocean. So despite the fact that you might get in the water, you might not want to get in the water. Another interesting thing that you might have heard about in the news is that this temperature rise in the Gulf of Maine is happening more at the end of the summer. Maybe you've noticed over the time frame that the summer is bleeding into the fall.
Yeah.
It's not the spring. The summer is not expanding into spring. It's expanding into fall. And that has a lot of influence on the biology of things in the Gulf of Maine and in the area, and when things happen, when migration happens, when phytoplankton, zooplankton blooms happen in the water. Warm water is not the most productive water. And the reason why the Gulf of Maine is traditionally one of the most productive bodies of water in the world is because of all the cold water. Cold water is very productive water. It means that it's a great fisheries water. And of course, the Gulf of Maine is legendary for ground fish, especially cod. So a lot of people ask me, why is this happening in the Gulf of Maine in particular, right? The Gulf of Maine is basically influenced by two currents, large world currents. This Newfoundland current, this is where all the cold water comes from the north. And this historically has been a huge influencer on why the Gulf of Maine is so cold and so productive. It is this water. This is the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream is known for having warm water, hence the two different color arrows, okay? Over time, climate change is pushing the Gulf Stream north. And this is basically pushing on this barrier. This has been the buffer to keep the warm Gulf Stream water out of the Gulf of Maine. And that barrier is weakening for reasons that are not clear. And the Gulf Stream is strengthening. And so more of this red, warm water is going into the Gulf of Maine. The other interesting thing you learn quickly when you study the currents of the Gulf of Maine is it's basically a bathtub. the cold water comes in from this Newfoundland current, and it wraps around and just circles like a big bathtub. Even though it looks wide open, but in this area, water actually, because of the bathymetry, which is a fancy word for underwater topography, the water actually only moves in certain restricted areas, this northeast channel being the primary place where water comes in and out. So it's not wide open. All water isn't flushing back and forth between the Atlantic and the Gulf of Maine. It's actually coming into a really small channel and exiting a really small channel. So that warm water of the Gulf Stream is being trapped in this bathtub. And that's primarily why the Gulf of Maine is warming more than the other world oceans. And this is having a huge impact on an array of things. This is just a diagram from the Portland Press Herald a couple of years ago, just showing all the changes in the Gulf of Maine and impacts on the biology. And just to tell you, instead of going through that whole diagram, I just thought I'd share one little story of a fisherman that I know. His name is David Goffel. And in 2010, not long ago, he landed, he's a New Hampshire fisherman, okay? He landed 60,000 pounds of cod. In 2016, he landed just under 4,000 pounds of cod. That's only 6 years. 60,000 versus 4,000. Cod is an iconic fish of the Gulf of Maine and of North America, really. I mean, a lot of the reason why we even are in this country has to do with timber and cod. And how many of you have seen the sacred cod in Massachusetts State House? Yeah. So, you know, important to the economy of, especially of the New England states in our early years. And today, actually, Massachusetts' economy is really tied to cod. And they are cold water fish, and they are being hit really hard by this warming water. And lobsters, how many people here enjoy lobster? There's basically no more lobster industry in Massachusetts. It is dying out in New Hampshire, and it's marching its way north. Now, this is not happening overnight. Was it last year or the year before? Maine had a banner lobster year. So, you know, things are good. I'm not trying to, depress you. But the lobster are marching out to sea and north. So soon, in maybe 100 years or so, it's going to be only a Canadian fishery, which is interesting to think about. So as I said, I did not come here to depress you. I just really wanted to underscore the need of the ocean, okay? It needs to be known. We need to understand it. We need to study it. We need a workforce of people who get it and who can do the science. And I wanted to then also underscore the Gulf of Maine is a really important place to do that work and to understand ocean systems. If we understand it there, we can apply it to all the other oceans that are kind of behind in warming, because they're all warming. So it's more, though, than just telling people this is a dire situation. There's a lot of dire situations. What we really need to do is inspire people. So Howard Thurman has this wonderful quote that I find really helpful. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So to me, it's about igniting passion. It's igniting an understanding that just invigorates you and makes you want to do work, because it's going to be work to solve these big, vexing problems, right? So here's my story. See if we can hear this. Okay, that's obviously not, well, it may not be obvious, but that's not marine biology. I came alive when I was an undergraduate. I was a political science major. I was a biology minor. I knew lawyers, and so I thought I'd be an environmental lawyer. That was how I was going to help save the places that I love. And I thought I would get rid of all of my biology credits in one fell swoop at a field station in Australia. And so I went there my junior year, and I sat on the floor of the rainforest with an ornithologist, and I heard that. That's dawn chorus on the Australian rainforest. And as each bird woke up, it started singing, it started calling, and she knew the species, what it was doing, was it breeding, who was it competing with, how many were in the area, and I was blown away. And I was like, wow, well, first of all, we can just sit here and do all the science. That seems pretty easy. But just the amount of information these birds were telling you, I couldn't believe. And it just opened my eyes right there. I wanted to be a scientist. I went back to my home institution. I changed my major to biology. And I have never stopped doing research. And I'm an ornithologist. And I jumped on the chance to help lead a field station in a marine lab as soon as I could, because this is what happened to me. I went to a field station and it just blew open my world, and I realized where my passion was. And every summer I witnessed this happening to students at Shoals Marine Lab. There is nothing like doing science next to a seasoned scientist that just builds your awareness. And I don't think that everyone's going to leave that island declaring their major in biology. But everyone leaves that island having a better understanding of science. And isn't that an incredibly valuable thing in this world? To be able to use science, understand science, and then a good percentage of them, and actually Shoals is really good at this, will become scientists, and many of them marine scientists. So, it's more than just creating scientists. But Shoals does have an amazing track record of creating scientists. So where are we for the few people who didn't raise their hand when you said you'd been to the Isles of Shoals? We're 6 miles offshore of Rye, New Hampshire. And it's an aggregate group of about 9 islands. And the Marine Lab is located on Appledore Island, which is the largest, 100 acres. For the keen observers in the room,
Seavey Island.
so I'll just throw this out there, especially since my dad is sitting in here. This is where the Seavey family got their North America start. In 1625, my 11th great-grandfather, William Seavey, came to the Isles of Shoals to do what? Fish. What? Cod. Cod was so important on the European market then. Does anyone know why? Why did everyone eat dried cod? There's 2 reasons. One, it preserved well, so it went far. That was number 1, but why was everyone eating cod? Yep. Religion. The Catholic Church ruled the day, and you could not eat meat on Fridays or any holy day, which actually, when you added it all up, was like a lot. But you could eat cod. That's why, if you go to Europe, there's cod embedded in a lot of religious icons. That's why cod is the sacred cod in Massachusetts. It's on the first emblem for the colony of New Hampshire. Like, it was really economically important because everyone was being told to eat it, basically. So that's our little story there. And actually, another time if you want to hear it, you actually invite me back, I can talk about my research, which is on Seavey Island, because we're taking back the island. I kid. I study seabirds, and there's the largest tern colony in the Gulf of Maine is on Seavey Island. So that's another story, though. So Shoals Marine Lab, for those couple of wildcats who were in the island, actually started in the 20s. And it wasn't called Shoals, it was UNH's Marine Laboratory, it was only UNH. And the group called themselves the Barnacles, and this is the pin that they made themselves. And this is Floyd Jackson, who started the lab. They were unfortunately kicked off when the military kicked them off so that they could build a radar tower on Appledore to protect the Navy shipyard that's in Portsmouth, the Kittery. You know, they fight about that all the time. Who owns the shipyard? But anyway, so the military was there during World War II. But in the 60s, a professor from Cornell was on the neighboring island, Star Island, and he thought that these entire islands was a great place to start a marine lab. He was at Woods Hole doing his research. He was an algae specialist or seaweed specialist. And he was lamenting the fact that undergrads are being pushed out of Woods Hole for grad students and postdocs. If you're gonna make your living doing research, you need a ton of grants. In order to get a ton of grants, you need a ton of publications, and so you need a whole lab full of postdocs who are just cranking papers. They're not asking questions, they're just writing papers. And undergrads are pesky because you have to teach them something. And so they were getting kicked out. And so he really lamented that, especially in marine science. There's a lot of skills. Think about the whole scuba diving part of marine science. There's a lot of skills that it takes to just get there to do the work. Never mind learn how to do all the science, okay? So he was really sad about that, so he started this lab for undergrads. And that's why today we are still remain dedicated to undergrads, and we are the largest marine lab that does that. And so here they are in the 60s, and literally look at the buildings. These students, this is very much the 60s and 70s. They did marine science in the morning and they did construction in the afternoon. And they literally built the lab. It's a little different today. This is a map of the island. All those purple squares are our buildings. It's basically a college campus on this 100-acre island. It's got dining hall, dormitories, classroom buildings, lab space, a fleet of boats from a 47-foot research vessel to the Zodiacs, and all manner of boat in between, including some sailboats. Salt water is everywhere around the island and on the island for students to bring stuff back from the ocean into the lab and study it. So here's a little video to invoke some summer even further. What happens on Shoals that's unique is right behind me. So this is the island classroom. Here you're outside all day and you're in the field. You're not reading about it in a textbook and hearing about it in an abstract lecture. You're looking at it in the hand with the professor in the field. You're studying it, you're taking it back to the lab, you're investigating the details. It really immerses you in the subject. Our faculty are from all over the world, and our students are from all over the world, really, and everybody's interested in marine science or sustainable living and solutions.
Hermit crab, Vigorous acadianus.
The community out here is really great. Everyone on the island has meals at the same time, so you really see everyone 3 times a day, get to know them, you know the staff. Everyone's really approachable if you need help with anything, and it's just such a beautiful place to work.
The main thing that I always think I come away with from here is it changed the way I see the world, and it makes me think differently. It instilled in me a desire to remain curious, to keep asking questions, and to realize that there's always a little more to what's going on than you might see on the surface.
To be surrounded by a perfect environment to do the work in, like-minded students, and all faculty that are sharing the same general interests in marine sciences, it's otherworldly for most students to get that experience in a concentrated block of time. Time and time again, this becomes a pivotal experience for these students as they go on in a career in science. That was the summer that I decided I was going to become a scientist.
And then, of course, living in the field, as any field biologist can tell you, is a great experience if you really want to understand a system. You experience the weather, you experience the variation in the behavior of animals, you experience the ecosystem, and you understand it like you never would understand it if you even just took a field trip into the field. So live out here for 2 weeks or the whole summer. It's an understanding you can't get in a classroom setting. So that was a little taste of the students and the activity. So this is just a quote from a woman who has a lot of credentials around science advising and in science. And she says that field stations like Shoals Marine Lab provide the best connection between a growing population of us, people, and the wonders and mysteries of the natural environment. And we do have programs on the island for undergraduates. And I just want to make it clear that the students and the faculty are from UNH and Cornell, but they're also from all over the world. And the faculty often are Shoals alumni who go on to an academic career in marine science, and they just really want to go back to the place that had this huge impact on them. And then we have public programs I'll tell you about at the end. So here's our mission. It's really 3 parts: scientific discovery, the immersive education, and then putting all this knowledge into action on the island and off the island. So the discovery. The amazing thing about Shoals is that it's senior scientists working next to postdocs, working next to grad schools, and surrounded by a ton of undergraduates. I have all kinds of financial incentives for scientists who are going to come to use the lab for research purposes to bring undergrads for them. So it's with them to help them with their research. So it's significantly cheaper to bring a whole lab full of undergrads to the island to work than graduate students. I'm just trying to find ways for the undergrads to literally get their feet wet and do science. The lab is 51 years old, and over that time there's been hundreds of publications and long-term data sets built over that time period. And long-term data is a really valuable thing that field stations and marine labs can provide to the world. They are places where the management doesn't change, where the infrastructure stays consistent, so that it affords the ability for people to build long-term data. And long-term data is the only way we understand things like climate change, long-term impacts of pollution, long-term impacts of fish and cod and other groundfish, things like that, that just take a long time to show the impacts or the results. Or the results might be really complicated. And so Shoals is really proud of some of our data. We have over 50 years of rocky intertidal data. The students have been collecting most of this data. We have over 35 years of songbird migration data. There's over 130,000 birds that have been banded at that migratory bird station. Migratory birds love following coastlines because they're just easy to see, and they stop at islands because they're notoriously safe and they're already following the coastline. So a good place to stop while you're following the coastline is any island. So we get a ton of them, and they've been studied for 35 years there. We have 8 years of one of the largest haul-out sites for marine mammals in the Gulf of Maine. So what does that mean? Gray seals and harbor seals haul themselves out during the day for a lot of reasons. They don't have to worry about predators. Sharks aren't going to chase them up onto the land. They can get rid of parasites. They can warm up. They can take care of their young and rest up on the rocky ledges. And Duck Island, which is the island just to our north of Appledore, is one of the largest seal haul-out sites in the region. On average, there's about 700 seals any given day. And we've been studying them for 8 years. And we take pictures of them. And then we run them through database. And we basically use like facial recognition software to look at the patterns on the seal bodies. And so that we can say, oh, this one, we've seen this one over 7 years. We know it's at least this old. You know, we can see survival. And one thing we note and document a lot is entanglement with fishing gear. That's a big issue. And another thing that we've been noticing lately, something, probably one of the top questions I'm asked, if I have ever seen this thing in the Isles of Shoals. Anyone want to guess? Have I ever seen, dun dun, dun dun, right. Great white sharks. Great white sharks are really common in Massachusetts. And they typically, historically, haven't come around the Cape. But here's the swimming kicker, right? The water is warmer, but the sharks are coming around because the water is warmer. So the sharks are starting to come around the Cape. And we actually had a listening device on the island last summer, listening for the tagged sharks in Massachusetts. There's about 200 tagged great white sharks in Massachusetts. We did not hear any of those sharks. But we have started to see impacts on the seals. So shark bites and stuff like that. So no, I have not seen a shark in the water, but we're starting to see some evidence. If any of you who raised your hand has been to Appledore Island, what was one thing that really stood out for you about your trip to Appledore Island? Maybe something that was in your face, perhaps. Anyone? Yeah.
I was just so impressed with the birds.
The birds, that's what I was hoping you would say.
And the little baby ones were just adorable.
Gulls. So there are a few thousand pairs of gulls that nest on this 100-acre island and share it with us. It's their home, and we're the interlopers. And as a teacher, it is an amazing tool to watch the biology of these seabirds unfold right in front of you because they don't move. Their nest is right there. You walk by it every day and watch them raise their chicks, which start off adorable and then go through an awkward teenage phase. And we have over 12 years of data on the breeding of the gulls. And in fact, we ban them individually. They all get their own name. They're not romantic names. They're like F05. There's two species, the herring gull and the great black-backed gull. And there are about 20-something species of gulls. I'm here to also teach you that there's no such thing as a seagull. There's just gulls and different species of gulls. So a great black-backed gull would probably never come and ruin your picnic, but a herring gull might. Great black-backed gulls are really pelagic, so that means they're on the ocean, getting their food from the ocean. Herring gulls are a little bit more, they'll get their food wherever they can get their food. And we find chicken wings and ribs on the island, and we definitely know we didn't eat them. So, and you know, an amazing thing about the gulls is they specialize in what they're eating. So the gull that's coming and taking potato chips, probably 90% of its diet is potato chips. They specialize to an amazing degree. They kind of divide the world of food among them. And it's amazing to see each nest. What you can find around the nest is incredibly consistent. There's one gull that eats the terns that I study, and that gull nest had like 20 tern remains around that nest, and we couldn't find any other gull nests with terns, so they're just really amazing that way. We have over 12 years of air quality data. This is just examples of all the different long-term data set in science happening on the island. And there's the archaeological research happening out there. I know a couple of you are interested in that. So this is a list of internships that are going to happen next summer. And it's a pretty stable variety of research internships programs for undergraduates. And each one of these has a PI, so a principal investigator that students working with to guide the intellectual scientific merit of their research. And then they also have 3 other scientists on the island who mentor them and help them through the whole process of science, from how do you ask a good question, how do you collect the data, what happens when X happens, it rains, something blows away, whatever, to analyzing the data and then communicating the data. And all the students create a scientific poster, and we have a symposium at the end of the summer where they give presentations. So they get they have the whole research experience in this internship. Many of our alumni go on to illustrious careers in marine science. And there's many professors of different universities who run marine science programs. This is the University of Rhode Island, head of the marine science program. That's a really great program. Tufts University professor who's working on the gulls. This guy works at the Smithsonian. He's a really well-known fisheries biologist. Some of you might have recognized Wendy Lull in the video. She just retired from running the Seacoast Science Center down on the coast. Shoals alumni. This guy runs the New Hampshire Sea Grant Extension Office. It just goes on and on. There's lots of them, and I meet people all the time. I was in DC 6 months ago, and I was talking to some people at NOAA, and 3 of them said they had gone to Shoals Marine Lab. So they're everywhere, and a really strong retention in marine science, which is really, I mean, yeah, I'm bragging, great lab, but it's really valuable to the students. So there's this network of marine scientists out there who all had this great experience as an undergraduate, and when they meet each other in airports or conferences or wherever, it's like an instant bond, and they have something to talk about, and then there's all these people at different levels of their career, and they really help pull each other up because they kind of get it. They all were really influenced by this place. So what we're really known for is this education, this immersive education. It's the type of education that we do where you are out doing it. It's not sitting in a lecture. If this was Shoals, after I stopped talking, we would all go out and walk into the intertidal. And we would see exactly, don't you wish you could do that right now and it wasn't freezing? But anyway, you can see what we were just talking about, and it's more real. You know, you just see, I mean, I don't know about you guys. My sister is the kind of person who can read a book and then get an A on a test. I have to read the book, I have to hear about it, but more importantly, I want to see it and hold it and touch it and measure it, and then I really get it. And that's what we call hands-on immersive education. And that's what all the students do there. And almost every course that they have out there has research component in it. So here's this is a sample of the courses that we have on the island. I'd say 90% of them involve students doing their own independent research. All of these classes, just making sure this is right before I say it, are 2 weeks long. But you get the same amount of credit as you would get in an entire semester. So that's the only thing you're doing when you're in this class. So you get up, breakfast is at 8, and at 9 o'clock you're doing oceanography, and you're doing it till 10 o'clock at night. And the only way you could sustain that amount of learning is if you're doing. And so that's really another reason, but as I said, going out and doing it is just such a great way to really embed the learning. So here's some quotes from the students. And the students just say over and over, like my experience in Australia, it's just a very pivotal experience. Even if, I mean, I'd also say it is rare, but I saw one student, I've worked at the lab for 4 summers. And I found one student who came out there and was like, this was a really great class, and I learned I didn't want to be a scientist. And that's great. I congratulated her on that. You know, that's important, because let me just say, 1-2 week class on an amazing island in Maine versus 3 years of graduate school, that's good math right there. And the uncommon scenario, I should say. So it's really important to put what we know into action. And before I took this job, I was working at a university I won't name because I'm about to say something that's not so flattering. But I was working at a marine lab. It was a wonderful place. I loved it a lot. But I always felt like I teach a class called Marine Conservation Biology. And I always felt like I was saying, well, you know, if we were really doing this right, we would have solar power. If we were really doing this right, we wouldn't be drinking this water from here, blah, blah, blah. I just felt like I wasn't walking the talk. And at Shoals, we get to walk the talk. And it's a great place to teach marine conservation biology because the whole island is powered off of green power. Solar, this picture shows we had a big campaign in 2014 to double our solar. And we have wind power. And the cool thing about this is the students, engineering students in an internship program designed this. So this is our building where our whole green grid is located. The students designed that. We needed to deal with the way we were to better address how we were dealing with waste on the island. Students designed composting toilets. And then we worked with the company to customize toilets that would work for the island. These are Clivus composting toilets. We never empty these toilets. They are so perfectly sized for the island that it all just degrades over time, and we never have to empty them. They could be used for soil compost, but we never even get to that point because they're so well designed for us. This right here is a new venture for us. It is aquaculture, and it's specifically called multi-trophic aquaculture. In the center is a steelhead trout. It's a kind of salmon. And when you're normally growing salmon in a cage like that, you're pouring a lot of fish food in there, and a lot of the food just falls through the cage, and then you have added nutrients to the water. And that's not a great thing to do. So how could you do that better? You surround this cage with mussels and algae, and that absorbs the nutrients that you're feeding and that the fish are wasting. And also the fish waste also feeds the mussels and the algae. And you can eat all of it. And the net result is this is actually improving water quality at the site. So the nutrients are actually being reduced at the site. And this is the Piscataqua River, and that's a river that has elevated nitrogen. And so these aquaculture units are actually reducing the amount of nitrogen. I mean, that's a fish you can feel really good about eating. It's actually an act of conservation to be eating that fish, those mussels, that algae. And algae, by the way, is a really fast-growing, hot food item. It's just a lot of bang for your buck. And how many people here have eaten algae? I mean, sushi's the obvious one, but it's in a lot of restaurants now. So the students, everything we do on this island, I think I probably made this clear, but the students are doing it. The students are doing this along next to the researchers developing this. And the interesting thing about this aquaculture unit is the United States is way behind the rest of the world when it comes to aquaculture. And if we are going to eat fish in a sustainable way, we need to find a way to do sustainable aquaculture. And not all aquaculture is equal. And so researching it and studying and determining the best way to do aquaculture is really important. And because it's relatively new in the United States, this is a great time to be doing it. And this has been very successful on the Piscataqua, but there's only limited estuary areas, and we need to be able to pull that offshore. And so that's why Shoals is a really important site for this research project, because they're taking it offshore and seeing how it deals with a saltier, harsher environment. So the students are participating in this cutting-edge research that we hope will prove successful, and we can export this methodology to other fishermen, because the fisheries industry in Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Maine is in decline. So what are all these fishermen going to do? Well, in New Hampshire, they're already taking up this aquaculture unit as their own. And they're using it right now mostly to supplement their fishing operation, but has a lot of promise.
Where do they get their water, their drinking water?
So on Appledore Island, we have a well. And we are the last of the Isles of Shoals to have a well. Most of the islands did have a well at one point, and we are very careful. And the composting toilets are a big part of that equation, because a typical toilet flushes 1.5 gallons of water per flush on average. And those composting toilets take 3 ounces of water. So it's a huge savings. Another thing about water on the island is that we're very careful about showering. So everybody takes a military shower. You know what that is? No? Yeah. Where you turn on the water, soap up while the water's off, and then rinse off. So you're just conserving water as you're showering. And then you're not allowed to have a shower every day. 2 or 3 a week, depending on the water supply. We do have a reverse osmosis machine on the island if we do run out of water. That only happens in a drought year. And we are actually in the process of buying a very small, high-efficient reverse osmosis machine because we make so much solar power now that in the middle of the day, when the sun is bright, we're actually spilling power, not using it all, not capturing it all in the batteries. So we have an opportunity to make water during that period so that we don't get into a drought, so we don't need to turn on the big reverse osmosis machine. So we work with a lot of partners. You'll see other universities up there that we do research with. My research I do with the state of New Hampshire Fish and Game. It's a fish and game managed tern colony, and they hire us to make sure that everything is going well on that colony, protect them, and monitor them. And then we do research on top of that. I actually sit on the board of the Northeast Coastal Station Alliance, and just in the last couple of years, we have built an alliance between all these field stations across the Gulf of Maine. And last year, for the first time, we all started doing monitoring of the intertidal zone using the same methods in the same 3-week period across the entire Gulf of Maine. Now, there's a lot of great oceanographic data where I pulled that information about the warming trends in the Gulf of Maine and acidification, things like that. But there's not really good coordinated biology research happening across the entire Gulf of Maine. So this group, we formed this group specifically to help that problem. And so we've started doing the Rocky Intertidal. And we're gonna, everyone has one transect this past year, and we're gonna build on it from there. We also do work with the Peabody Essex Museum. What is a marine lab doing with an art museum? Well, the island actually has a really strong art background. And we, 2 years ago, did an exhibit with at that museum of Childe Hassam's work on Appledore Island. He's called America's first impressionist, and he painted 10% of his work on Appledore Island. And so he had about 300 paintings, more or less, and we did an exhibit of just his work. And so this is work done in like the late 1800s. And a really cool thing about that work is the story it tells about biology. So he was a really impressionistic painter. Sounds like he was abstract, but he was actually incredibly detailed in his depictions of the landscape. And you can look at those depictions then and look at the landscape now, and you can tell exactly where he stood when he painted that painting, and you can see change. And you can see sea level rise, and you can see the change in the intertidal zone. I mean, it's really fascinating to look at that snapshot from this artistic point of view, not photographs, you know, an impressionistic painter. And then Strawberry Bank is a great history museum that's near us who picks up again on all this history that we have. So lots of great partnerships with our neighbors and beyond. So the last couple slides are just things, because I hope I piqued your interest in this place. And Celia Thaxter is who? I know a couple of you know who Celia Thaxter is. A poet. She was, and if you have not put your name in that raffle and you want to, put your hand up. Okay. Could someone maybe go out there and get the raffle box? Excellent, thank you. So when she comes back, you can put your name in there because I brought An Island Garden, which is written by Celia Thaxter. And this is probably her most famous book. She grew up in the Isles of Shoals, and her family started a grand hotel in the late 1800s on Appledore Island. And she formed around her, she was very charismatic, she formed around her this art colony, which Childe Hassam was a part of. And there were musicians, there were artists, and there were writers. And she was a little bit of everything, but she was most famous for her poetry and her writing. So as soon as we'll do that, I'll give this away. But we recreated her garden. So the lab did that in the 70s. And we have it in the exact same place. And there's a diagram in that book. And that's the template that we used to create this garden. And so a marine lab, why do we have this garden? We have it because what goes into protecting a historical garden is not that far off from conservation of wild landscapes. So the conservation of a cultivated landscape is very similar. Also, importantly, in my opinion, is that when you walk onto that island and think of our students, our 20-something, 18-year-old student, gets off the boat, walks onto this island, of course they think the island has looked like that for all time. Right? They never think about who came before them because they're 18. And so this garden reminds us there was a time, so we have 120 beds on the island, okay? So that's our capacity. The Appledore house held 500 people. And that was just the hotel. There were houses all around it. So there's probably, I don't know, 600, let's be conservative, 600 people were on this island, and now there's 120. Yankee Magazine actually wrote an article about Appledore Island because it's a rare island that's gone backwards in terms of development. We're more natural and native than we were then in the 1800s. So it's a fascinating time, and I like to remind the students because everything that is on that island today in the water around us is influenced by what has been there and what has gone on there, from the Native Americans to the fishing communities to this grand hotel era to the Marine Lab. So you can come to Appledore and take a day trip and visit this historic garden and learn all about Celia.
Tell Brenda we need a field trip.
Okay, field trip is being mounted here. And then we have adult and family programs because it's just a shame. The students go back in like the first couple weeks of August to go back to school. And it is gorgeous out there. And the gulls are all done breeding and they're gone, so they're not going to dive bomb you and pester you while they protect their chicks. So we run these adult and family programs. Plus, it's our responsibility to do outreach. We learn a lot about that place, and we share our science with the public. And there are all kinds of things. Everything on here is trying to get somebody's special interests, but all of it mixes in marine science. So we have writers' retreats. We have marine science. You could bring your children, grandchildren to that. If you want to see what it's like to be a student on the island, this is a crash course in Shoals biology. For the artists in the room, we have a whole artist retreat. An artist named Wendy Turner. She's probably most famous for her watercolors, but she also does oil painting. Comes out and leads this retreat. It's really, really nice. And you don't have to be a painter. My dad did it as a photographer. Any kind of artist can come out. This is my personal favorite one, where we eat our way across the island. With biologists and historians and chefs, and you can learn a lot about biology through a dinner plate. And we forage in the intertidal. We go fishing with a fisheries biologist. We go collecting plants with a botanist. We learn about how people in the past have used all those things. And then we have 2 James Beard award-winning chefs cook everything for us. Every single meal is cooked by these 2 guys. One of them is Evan Mallett of Black Trumpet. If you've been there in Portsmouth, it's amazing. I highly recommend it. The other one is Sam Hayward. He owns 4th Street in Portland, Maine. It's also, you need to go there next time you're in Portland. And then there's other programs actually on that flyer that are not on this list, including an archaeological dig, which is pretty fun out there as well. So I would love to take any of your questions or comments. I thank you so much for being such a great audience. Thank you. Make sure everyone's got their name in here if you want to. Okay, then you can put some.
Oh, me?
I'll take questions after this.
Is your name in there?
Nope.
Who wins it, give it to the Woodside Library.
Maybe. Oh, is this Bob
Smith.
That's a
Smith.
Oh, Smith. Bob Smith, you have interesting handwriting. Is he here?
Bob here?
Uh-oh. Well, you guys know who this is, right? You can give it to him. All right. Can you get that to him? Or?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'd love to take questions. Yeah.
Just say I could take the book to
Oh, okay. Yeah, whoever can take the book to him.
What happens on
She did.
Appledore between now and next
Yeah, great question. So we open in May and we close in October, and it is just buttoned up tight. But if you go on our website, we have live cameras, and there's actually a snowy owl on the island right now that you can see, and I highly recommend it in a nor'easter. It is super fun. It's just fun to watch. The waves are amazing. It's like crashing over the island. Anyway, so it's just buttoned up, closed up, waiting patiently for us to return.
Doctor, this is an impressive organization you have, but I know you don't live off the land. Could you tell us about the finances that fund the facility?
Yeah, okay. Right before I get to that, someone said, where do you go in the winter? Our main office is at University of New Hampshire, and we have a smaller office at Cornell. So most of us are at UNH. Money. Okay, 70% of our operating budget comes from tuition dollars. And then 30%,
Don't trip over that.
I won't, thank you, is from our annual fund. Funds, mostly donors, but also grants. So we get grants to support. The grants are usually aimed at programs, not operations. So we have we teach New Hampshire science teachers about marine science, and that's a state-funded program that we have. Almost all of the research internships are funded by different foundations or federal, or mostly federal money. But our operations are mostly from an annual fund and tuition. Thanks for asking. And I did bring, if anyone is interested in supporting the lab, information that's out on the table if you want to participate in that way. Didn't you?
Years ago, I worked for a company, I won't tell you how many years ago it was, that had funding for aquaculture of lobsters. Is that work still going on or not?
Oh, that's a really...
This was federal funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Well, it was quite
And I don't know of anyone doing aquaculture for lobsters.
I think they
Oysters, mussels, fish, algae. Yeah. And now there's a lot of bait fish. Bait fish are a big issue. Concern about their amount, because the lobster industry uses a lot of bait fish to get the lobster.
The reason that they didn't do it, it took too long to grow a lobster to the point that you could market it.
Yeah. I know they grow crayfish, but I've never heard them growing lobster. Yeah.
Oh, jeez. Tongue-tied. Yeah.
Happens to all of us.
Mammals. Do you have any large mammals like fox, coyotes, raccoons?
The reason why we have such a large seabird colony is because we don't have mammals. We do have one species of mammal other than us people, and that's muskrat, that are vegetarian, so they don't eat the eggs of the seabirds who are just on the ground. And the gulls are pretty aggressive, so they fend themselves off. But if there was a fox on that island, it'd be a free-for-all. There wouldn't be any birds. And in fact, we have to be very careful with the tern colony. We are constantly monitoring the tern colony because of mink come over there. So, and if that does happen, we trap them and we just take them for a ride. The other thing that comes and eats the terns, not the gulls, because the gulls are big. The great black-backed gull is the largest gull in the world, and it's a force to be reckoned with. But the terns are more delicate, and peregrine falcons will eat them. Snowy owls try to stay sometimes all year and eat the terns. Anytime those things happen, again, they get trapped and taken for a ride. Not killed. That's not a euphemism. They actually get taken for a ride.
Concrete overshoes. What are you doing to disseminate the information that you're gathering from your research to try and influence change?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. Oh, and the answer, I'll try to give you a short answer. Yeah. Well, all the researchers are highly motivated personally through publications. So that's the first lowest bar, I guess, because they need that for their careers. And the students, we actually finance the students to go, all of the students from the research internships, they spend the whole summer doing research on the island. We underwrite them to go to a conference, which is a great experience for them, and it gets the science out as well. And then all those public programs is one way that we get it out to the public. And then the other reason why we started that Northeast Coastal Station Alliance is to work across the whole Gulf of Maine with other field stations to tell the complete story to the public. So, and a lot of our partnerships are about information sharing as well.
I got my voice back.
Okay.
Is the heron and egret nesting colony still active?
Wow, you have been there, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
So there was a really interesting wading bird colony on this island that disappeared in the 90s. Heron and little blue heron and egrets, snowy egrets. Glossy ibis, yeah. And so we actually, they have not come back. So somebody who will go unnamed, actually I don't know their name, but I have a feeling who they are, released raccoons on the island. No mammals, right? I mean, you know. So the raccoons had a big impact on the wading birds. Raccoons actually are probably the #1 predator of wading birds. And because they climb trees into the nests of the herring and all of that. And so they have not come back to nest, although recently, as in like 2 years ago, we found a night heron nest. And then the glossy ibis circle the island a ton, but we have not found any nests. So maybe they'll come back, maybe they won't, I don't know. It'll be interesting. We are not doing anything to induce the restoration of that colony, because if I tried to bring back wading birds, we would definitely bring back night heron. And night heron are really aggressive predators. They eat terns. And so if we were responsible for bringing back a bird that started eating the endangered species, that would be uncomfortable. So we're just letting that all play out naturally, if you will.
So the generations of the birds were offended and they went away?
Correct.
How does the knowledge pass down?
I know. So how does that maintain itself, right? Yeah. Because colonial birds, wading birds like these long-legged herons and ibis and gulls and terns and gannets, insert your favorite seabird, that is colonial. No one wants to be the first. They only come down to an island to nest if somebody else is there. How many of you know about puffin restoration in Maine?
Yeah.
It's a famous story, right? Okay, Steve Kress, who's a colleague of mine, a fellow Cornell faculty, I do a lot of research with him. The way he did that was to make decoys. And this is how we rebuilt the tern colony. You make a decoy. And this is why hunters use decoys. The birds see a decoy and they think, that's a safe, good place to nest. And then they go there. So you have to have a brave bird to start, which apparently doesn't come around very often because it's been since the 90s to start this. And they'll all pile on when they see a few birds start doing it, because they really, the response to be together in a colony is clearly really important. And that's about safety, really, from predators.
You mentioned that an important part of the program is to get the undergraduate students to go to conferences and to give papers, to do their own research, and that you extract that or you get those resources largely from tuition, or do you get that from fundraising?
Fundraising to get the students at conferences, yeah. The tuition really pays for activities on the island. So the faculty, the boats, the lab resources, the keeping the lights on, all that kind of stuff, so. I'll just, hold on. I'm just gonna take like 2 more questions because it's 7:30 and I want to be respectful of your time.
Would you tell us about that tallest building in the picture there behind you?
Yeah, so, yeah, that's the radar tower that the military built.
Oh.
So there's a lot of history in that building, so it remains. Yeah. Oh, and it's the best research platform. On top of this radar tower, you might see some of the instrumentation, the weather station, a bat migration listening station, like we have the best internet on this island, and we've actually brought the internet to all the islands of Shoals. On top of that tower, our very first green grid is at the bottom of the tower, so we really use that tower. It's the highest point anywhere in the region. I mean, you have to go to the White Mountains to get as big as that. So, so it's very useful. 911 is actually bouncing off of this tower. An offshore wave energy experimental turbine data is flowing over this tower right now. All kinds of stuff. That's another way that we make money, by having this tower. And thank you, military. One more question?
Offshore wave energy.
Yeah. So that's being developed by UNH and private industry together. And it's located about a mile on the ocean side of the islands. And they are looking at, generating power from waves. There has been that work on the island. Well, they've looked at tidal energy wave generations, and now this is waves. The tidal one, they thought the tidal range between the Isles of Shoals would be able to generate energy, but at that time, it was kind of deemed unsuccessful, that there wasn't enough tidal range, that you have to go up to like the Bay of Fundy to get the kind of tidal range to generate enough power. But the wave energy turbine, they're really pushing the technology right now and trying to make some leaps forward. So we're helping that project through this sort of data sharing method. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.